Welcome to This Must Be the Place. I'm your host, Alo Galinsky. Each week, I'll uncover what's happening in Sonoma County, diving into the hidden gems and quirky corners. I'll be interviewing some of our local legends, as well as people you didn't know you need to know, all through the eyes of a craft beer enthusiast living in wine country. Join me as we explore one sip, one story, and one adventure at a time, and together we'll find out why this must be the place. Today, we are joined by Sayre Piotrkowski, the Executive Director of the Bay Area Brewers Guild, an advanced Cicerone, and proud Petaluma High School graduate. In this beer-soaked episode, we are going to discuss the FeBREWary campaign that graces Sonoma County every year, the state of the beer industry around our county, and what breweries you just shouldn't be missing. With our host also being a Cicerone, we're going to get down and nerdy about just why Sonoma County is beer country as much as it is wine country, and what makes you thirst to get out there and explore. Welcome, Sayre.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to dig in with you here. I know you and I have had a little bit of history together, and so it's fun to chat with a friendly and familiar face. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
So starting off here, for folks who might be hearing about this for the first time, what is FeBREWary and how did it start here in Sonoma County?
I believe FeBREWary was started by Visit Santa Rosa, and it is part and parcel to a lot of things that FeBREWary has a pretty significant history in Bay Area beer in general. Sonoma County people will know that is when Pliny the Younger arrives, but that actually was the result of an existing tradition called the Double IPA Festival, which just occurred last weekend, I think for the 26th time. And that happens in Hayward, but breweries from all around would brew particularly strong IPAs for that festival. And Pliny the Elder was originally brewed for that festival, and then Younger comes out of that. That was also one of the tentpole events that began what we now know as SF Beer Week, which took place in what was called Strong Beer Month, which was spearheaded by 21st Amendment and Magnolia Brewing 2 decades ago.
And those are some of the OGs.
The cynical answer to your question is it's like a restaurant week. You do it when retail business is trending down to try to invigorate local businesses. And there's certainly something to that. But I think we've grown beyond that with beer in February in the Bay Area, and particularly in Sonoma County, where we've got something on the verge of like a Beaujolais Nouveau. Beaujolais Nouveau is when the new Beaujolais wines can first be consumed, and it's become this giant party in northern France and southern UK. And that has a specific time on the calendar for an agricultural reason. Ours is not necessarily an agricultural reason, but it is this tradition that maybe did start out of, February can be a really rough and slow month. Let's do some programming to bring the people in, but has really become this thing when tourists know to come to the area. Brewers know to do their most exciting collaborations. And for many, many years, brewers have been making these enormously, kind of ridiculously strong beers. And all of that has coalesced into this season of celebrating small breweries and local beer and strong beer in the Bay Area for now, really over 2 decades.
Well, it sounds like it's steeped in a lot of history. And as you said, a lot of maybe little reasons to come together and celebrate about beer. But maybe most importantly, how is FeBREWary different from just doing a brewery crawl or hitting a festival for a day? What makes it so unique and special?
I mean, I think the short answer to what makes it so unique and special is people have decided to make it unique and special. So, you've got the effort of your local tourism board to provide free transportation. You've got all of these breweries putting together really fun special releases. You've got just the coordination of, you have such an amazing concentration of literally world-class breweries there in Sonoma County. And not every industry that has a concentration of world-class operations works together and collaborates in the way that the brewing industry does. And so all of those things coming together, the shortest answer would be Pliny the Younger, right? Like you're going to be bouncing around in a town where many of the retailers are pouring, I think at this point, what is safe to say the most sought after beer in the universe.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And so that, West Veletrin would like a word, I suppose, but there's one of the most sought after beers in the universe. And that's extraordinary, right? So maybe you're going to do that anyways. So why not also make sure you go and visit Moonlight and Hen House and Cooperage and Old Kaz and Parliament and Cuvée and all of these other places that, you do drink at year round, but you've decided that this is the time when we make a big deal about it and when we really reflect on how lucky we are to live in this beer mecca.
Absolutely. And we'll touch on this a little bit later, but I always have said that Sonoma County is beer country as much as it is wine country.
I mean, I understand why you guys try to put us on equal footing. Beer is so much more popular than wine.
Sure.
We as beer people need to be okay saying this. And that's not knocking wine. I love wine. I believe I'm wearing a Martha Stoneman hat right now. The fact that you feel the need to say that any marketing organization feels the need to say that, is a testament to how good wine has done the work that we're trying to do with things like FeBREWary and SF Beer Week.
Sure.
Wine feels special. Wine feels destination oriented. Obviously, there's a natural connection to the land, and so it is destination oriented. But if you look at the consumption of wine versus the consumption of beer in any region, even in Beaujolais, even in Burgundy, beer is so much more popular than wine. And I think it's okay to say that. And that doesn't mean when you make your trip to Sonoma County, you shouldn't visit all the wonderful wineries. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But I would argue that the beer culture in Sonoma County is closer to being unique than the wine culture. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of places in the world that you can visit and go to beautiful settings and drink incredible wine. And when you're in Sonoma County, that being one of those settings, you should do that. I would say beer in Sonoma County, 5 places in the United States, maybe 15, 20 in the world. And you can make an argument it's the best in the United States. That's not me saying that. There's literally been studies done that have said that. So let's get a little immodest.
All right. Sounds good. We'll be immodest the rest of our chat then. But to start that off, I want to talk about Sayre. So tell me about your recent ascension to the executive director of the Brewers Guild. And was this always a goal of yours?
Absolutely not. No. Kind of came out. So I have a consulting company,
right?
That I've actually had for many years, but I worked full time for Hen House Brewing Company for 7-8 years, and so wasn't doing any consulting. And coming out of that, kind of slowly restarted it up and got approached by the Brewers Guild initially just to do some consulting work, and the conversation very quickly snowballed to kind of part-time executive director, and now with Beer Week, which is the Bay Area Brewers Guild's biggest annual initiative on the horizon, it's a full-time gig, and I'm not really doing any other consulting. So no, I don't have a background in running nonprofits. I'm a guy who understands beer and I think understands what makes beer compelling for others. Mm-hmm. And in that regard, the fact that the guild was looking for someone with those skills less than someone who would be the most appropriate person to approach Visa or Hilton for a multi-year sponsorship.
Sure.
And those that don't know me, that's not me. Spoke to me, and it was really like, okay, because if you've read my writing or the kind of consulting that I do a lot of advocating for going back to doing the hard stuff. Like I'm old, I'm about to be 45 years old. I've been in this industry 20 years.
So old.
Well, I mean, comparatively, right? And I remember how much we built this just on constant education and getting other people excited about the things we were excited about. And for very understandable reasons, when things were booming like crazy, people were growing like crazy, we became a lot more of a spreadsheet, P&L, strategy-oriented industry. And obviously there's a place for that. But I think we maybe took our eye off the ball of what really drove our growth, which was making something extraordinary and getting good at explaining to people what's extraordinary about it.
And making people curious.
Exactly.
If they're not already.
And then making sure that curiosity isn't just sated, making sure that curiosity begets more curiosity, right? The rabbit hole thing.
So it sounds like you brought a nice balance back to kind of the overhead of the Brewers Guild in the way.
I mean,
or you're working on it.
Or completely spun the car in the other direction. Yeah, it's a tiny organization. I'm the only employee.
Right.
I do have a board of 10 members, and we get a lot of volunteers. But what I'm good at becomes what the organization does for a little while.
Now, what was the beer or the moment that made you realize that this work mattered to you?
There's been so many. I do. Like the thing that immediately jumps to mind, I was doing a beer dinner at a restaurant that I worked at called St. Vincent in San Francisco. And they were the seed to the kernel dinners. So we paired a veteran brewery with a brand new brewery. So many things happened in this dinner. So we did a series of these, but the one that's coming to mind is Craftsman Brewing Company out of Pasadena was our seed. At that time they were probably about 20 years old. And it was the first ever beer dinner for a brewery called Santa Adarius out of Santa Cruz, who has become, a nationally recognized producer of, Saison and other kind of keepsake
Of all my
styles.
favorite styles.
Yeah. So many things were going on. My grandfather was still alive at the time, and he attended. He tasted a beer called 1903 from Craftsman, which is a pre-prohibition style lager. And he was like kind of dumbfounded. And he was just like, this is what beer used to taste like when I used to really drink, like 40s and 50s kind of thing. And so that was cool to see beer kind of functioning as a time machine for him, the way that a song can. And then Tim, who was the founder, who was then kind of the face of Santa Adarius, literally like tasting things back and forth and being real serious about it. And I can't remember the specific course, but he's like, I think we got him on this course. And it was just very cool to see, and like seeing the cultural relevance of beer, being able to provide different things for different people, to be put into a context like that, where I recognized something similar in the palate of these two breweries that were geographically disconnected, were disconnected in terms of era, certainly disconnected in the way that the consumer perceives them. And putting that all over a meal, and it really felt like the kind of curation that actually is additive, right? It wasn't just like Sayre's favorite, BuzzFeed list. And so that springs to mind. Working with Mercedes from SoCo Market on the Freshtival. I ran the Freshtival 2 of its 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
And the 2 that I did, we worked very closely with SoCo Market and put a miniature version of SoCo Market in the Freshtival. So you had Latino, millennial, Sonoma County tiny businesses operating within this collection of nearly 100 Bay Area small businesses that are the breweries. And we brought out such a different crowd, such a diverse crowd, a crowd that actually looks like Sonoma County. I think a lot of people who do marketing work in Sonoma County forget that it is a Latino county.
Sure.
And, it was just so cool to see. We also had Galvin's out there, and you see what that business has grown into. We had Camacho's out there. So just the way that the little bit of power I've been given to choose who we would collaborate with, whether that was who Hen House would collaborate with, who St. Vincent, who Monk's Kettle, who Hogg's Apothecary would showcase on their lists. Hogg's Apothecary was one of the first handles for Cellar Maker, Fieldwork, Hen House, Faction, Berryessa. I could go on and on and on. And, taking zero credit for what's happened to those breweries since, their talent and ingenuity is why they're successful. They needed those early handles. And, being part of providing that for those companies when they were infants and seeing them now grow into these, monsters is very cool.
Absolutely. And Sonoma County and California, Northern California in general, with New Albion and all these breweries, it has such a rich history in beer. But when do you believe modern craft brewing really took hold, and what made Sonoma kind of fertile ground for beer culture?
I would say, and Sonoma County has a huge hand in this, when self-distributing breweries started showing up on mainstream draft lists.
Okay.
So I often tell the story that stole this story from my former boss, Colin McDonald at Hen House. He says when Hen House went out into the world and started selling their beer, the first question that most retailers would ask was, what distributor are you with? And he got to say, we're self-distributed. And many, many retailers went, oh, like Brian from Moonlight, because someone already went out and did that work of saying, this is another way for the industry to operate.
Yeah.
My tiny company and your tiny company can do business without involving a larger. My beer is going to be fresher. I'm going to know the people who sell it here because I'm the one coming in and doing deliveries. I'm going to have this one-to-one relationship that is going to imbue the product you're selling with a lot of value and genuine personhood or personality, right? And I don't think there's anyone more important in getting people to understand why that was cool and how it made the beer better than Brian Hunt and then Vinny from Russian River.
Right.
Those two companies rolling in. We used to taste the Pliny when it got tapped and guess the date on the keg. at
That's
lunchtime.
fun.
Yeah. And it would be like, was it 3 days old? Was it 20 days old? But it was never more than that, right?
Right. I worked at
And
Russian River for a chunk of time as a tour guide, and we did sensory panels where it was the exact same thing. We were doing all the sensory on how old is this or what beer is this, and it was always fascinating to see the differences and taste the differences
yeah,
between them all.
yeah. And I think so. So why I think that's kind of a BC AD date, right? The brew pubs certainly existed before that. People were going into some breweries and drinking. But I think the overwhelming palate effect that brewery fresh beer had to the consumer helped drive this, whoa, we're just going to go drink at breweries,
Right.
which is how the industry looks today, right? The
Yeah.
industry is so much more retail oriented today. And even people who I don't think would consider themselves serious beer people or people for whom beer is a huge part of their lives know that it's a best practice to go drink at a brewery.
And it also
And
brings into the question that third space mentality where we could talk for hours about how tap rooms have evolved into these third spaces, but we're on a limited time here with a lot to cover. So
sure. Yeah. And that's much later on in
yes.
the moment I'm talking about. Yeah.
So how do you think the proximity to agriculture, coastal climate, and also wine culture shape the styles that brewers gravitate towards here?
I don't know that I'm the right one for that question. I think Brian Hunt has talked a lot about bucking against the orthodoxy of like the BJCP style guideline
Mm-hmm.
and wanting to make beers for his context, whether that is driven by consumer taste, culinary culture, available ingredients, tax policy. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into what makes a beer style or makes a beer style appropriate for a certain context. I would say that being fluent in slow food, being a region that understands the importance of scalt and malt, the local land trusts that keep the farm maintain plots of land as farmland in perpetuity. If you're a culture or a region that understands why that's important, that's a big step towards understanding why we should care about small breweries and why we should want the things that we put in our bodies to be produced locally. So I think that is vital for invigorating small beer business. And I think Sonoma County had a leg up in that way. I'm also like increasingly, I'm getting more and more towards this like great man, great woman view of how history works. Like, because that's where Brian Hunt lived, because that's where Vinny decided to open Russian River, because that's where, you know, any number of publicans operated places where people got educated. Like somebody has to do it. You can have every economic, agricultural, regional advantage, but there have to be these characters that are just like, I think this is important. I think people need to be on this, and I'm going to dedicate my life to making sure they know why.
And it
And
takes
like,
a lot. It takes a lot
yeah,
of work and a lot of want to. That much I
exactly.
know.
I think I was a bit more determinist about those external factors 5-10 years ago. When you start really looking at like, why did this develop the way it does? Sometimes it comes down to like, you know, double IPA is a perfect example. This guy really liked the few double IPAs he'd tasted. I think he tasted 4 before he decided to throw a festival. And then that became the animating style for so much of craft beer history, from Vermont, from Chicago, from Denver, right? Like, and it's because this dude tasted some of them and was like, we should do a festival around this, you know?
And
And like,
celebrate it.
I don't want to undervalue just the prerogative and effort of individuals in what makes Sonoma County Sonoma County.
Absolutely. Now, what styles, or is there a style in particular, do you think Sonoma brewers do exceptionally well compared to maybe other regions of California, not even just the North Bay?
I mean, the one that immediately pops to mind, because Pliny looms so large, because Henhouse grew on Brewery Fresh IPA, is heavily aromatic hoppy beer, right?
Yeah.
Like huge emphasis on late hop addition, but
And balanced too.
drinkable, right? We are in an era where you can't get by if it's not also like, you know, you can't do 2 or 3 of them. You know, then I think that you've also got Cuvée, one of the few dedicated Belgian operations in Northern California left, and Russian River still does a good chunk of Belgian beer. And then now 30 plus years in, the world has finally caught up to Moonlight, right? Now the hippest thing a craft brewery can brew is a Czech style lager. And Reality Check's been sitting there for going on 3 decades, you know? The simple short answer to your question is strong, heavily aromatic IPAs, double IPAs, pale ales, hoppy beer.
Right.
But there's so much more going on there, and so much more that I think was culturally resonant and extremely influential.
So, building on that, if someone could only drink 3 beers during February, somebody only had the time to drink 3 beers during their visit to Santa Rosa, Sonoma County during February to understand Sonoma County beer, what would they be? And I'm holding you to 3. You can't go above that.
Okay. And they've never been there before.
And they've never been here before. This is their first exposure to FeBREWary Sonoma County beer scene.
Okay. So you got to drink Death and Taxes.
Got to drink Death and Taxes, absolutely.
Yeah, even though the Czech style stuff, I think, is where the kind of craft beer cutting edge has gone to live. You will run into other, you can drink Cohesion, you can drink Geisshaus, you can drink these, Bierstadt, these other wonderful producers of Czech style lagers from around the world. There is no other beer like Death and Taxes.
No. So and I actually just had it for the first time in a couple of years last week. For our listeners who might not know, Death and Taxes is from Moonlight Brewing in Santa Rosa. And I just had it last week for the first time in years. And I am the weird beer geek that does not like dark lagers. Maybe a Doppelbock, but the Czech style, the Schwarzbiers, those dark lagers that are low ABV with a roasted malt profile.
Yeah.
I just want a stout or a porter because I don't like the combination of the heavy roasty or bitter and the light body. But Death and Taxes.
Yeah, Death and Taxes is not light body.
No, it is not. Yeah. And it was coffee and it was creamy and it was just gorgeous. And I was so happy to revisit it as part of this kind of initiative I'm doing called Flagship FeBREWary, where I'm going around to breweries and highlighting their flagship beers. So I could wax on poetic about my first sip of Death and Taxes in a while, but I'll go back to you for your
regularly.
Other 2 beers.
Yeah. So Death and Taxes, for all those, everything we said and more, and while you're drinking that, to reinforce what we talked about earlier about just a determined individual changing the future. Imagine going and selling that into bars when you didn't have a distributor and it's 1990 or early 2000s. And you're like, yeah, it's a black beer. Is it? Oh, stout. Well, not really. It's not a porter. It's a black lager. What's that mean? I thought lagers would look like Coors Light. Just the amount of educational heavy lifting that had to be done for that beer to get the foothold it is now maintained for decades is extraordinary.
It's a mind-bending beer.
Yeah. So Death and Taxes. Second one's easy. If you're in Sonoma County right now and you don't drink Pliny the Younger, there will be people in your life that are mad at you. So do it.
There are people in my life that are mad at me because I'm in Sonoma County and have access to it. So
absolutely, that's what I mean.
It goes both ways.
Like, oh, I went to France, but I'm gluten free. Like, no, you're gonna eat bread. And so I think that you got to do that. The impossible to overstate what that beer did to craft beer culture, to getting people excited about hop aroma and freshness. I mean, yeah, it was like a supreme drop. It still is, people line up around the block and all that. So Pliny the Younger is the easy answer. Third one is fun because I want to give you, I've talked about, foundational breweries, but let's talk about somebody who's doing something new and exciting. And okay, I said earlier in this interview, if you market anything in Sonoma County and you don't realize that it is a Latino county, culturally omnivorous, multilingual Latinos, but Latinos. So Chismosa from Old Kaz was they got on that really early. It's very genuine in the way it's produced, but it is a simple, Mexican style lager with a bit of color. So those would be the 3 I would say. And I gave you the Younger's not really a flagship, but it's incredibly well known. So I gave you things that fit with your flagship FeBREWary and are a nice tour of the different generations of companies and brewers and different sizes. Say a lot about what works for a brewery in Sonoma County.
Well, you segue right in my next question perfectly, Sayre, which is what excites you most about the current generation of Sonoma County brewers and breweries?
Ingenuity. When I think about the Old Cast story is so resonant with the kind of can do, we'll figure it out spirit. Tom tells the great story of how they got their brew house. Field work in Berkeley was trading up. And I think they put an image online of the old brew house just sitting in the parking lot. Somebody reaches out and it basically was like, you can have it if you can get it out of this lot today. They roll down there, strap it on a truck and bring it back, not knowing how it's going to fit in their brewery, not knowing what to do, but knowing that it would be hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings if they can pull it off. And they did. And that, that brewery is kind of pieced together out of the bones of other breweries or the discarded pieces of closed breweries to see how much the beer quality has improved as they've gotten more and more of a foothold and been more and more financially stable. So I think hanging on to that, why not? Let's try it. This might work. This feels like fun. This is something I'm excited about as your impulse, as opposed to what's the market doing? Can I follow it? Right. Once we're doing that, I have a harder time articulating our value to the end consumer. That makes us less different from Bud Miller Coors.
Yeah. Now, is there a brewery doing something truly different that you think points towards the future of local beer here?
I mean, Cuvée is certainly doing something different. Belgian beer, which was a huge part of what got people excited about beer when I first got in this industry, has really become a niche as Americans have kind of settled in on pale lager and hoppy beer. But Cuvée has stayed really dedicated to producing these classic Belgian styles. They pour a number of them from bottle on Saturdays there. It has now become a relatively unique experience in beer drinking. So, would I wager on that being the next big trend? Absolutely not. But I think it's a very cool and precious thing that you get to access when you go and visit them. And it is the new trend in that specialization is, I think, where we're going.
And authenticity. Right? I mean, they're a Belgian-born family who are now here doing what they're doing. And it's an experience to go visit them. I was there on Saturday, and I said, as you said, I saw some of those special bottles out there, and they really do stick to their lane, and they do it well.
Yeah, and I think that's good advice. As we get to 10,000 breweries in the country, not everybody can be chasing the same customers, the same styles, and I think primarily it's gonna be regional, and that region can be 10 blocks, right? Like we're the brewery for this neighborhood, and this is who we serve. But it can also be stylistic. Can also be cultural, the same way restaurants find their audiences. As we become an industry that, we don't have there aren't as many breweries as restaurants, but that number's a lot closer than it used to be. We're going to behave a little more like that. And it's going to be like, okay, do you really matter to this neighborhood? Do you really matter to this region? Do people come to you for something specific? And so in that way, I do see what Cuvée is doing as indicative of where we're going.
Yeah.
The irony is, the big trend is like beer flavored beer is back, and people are really excited about lager beer, and Moonlight has been there for 30 years, so that it's.
And they have side pours, which is unique and something educational that you can get, which I love walking up. There's happening with 3-4 side pours available. And for a first time visitor, how would you suggest building a FeBREWary beer day in Sonoma County? You have one day, and you're a first-time visitor. So along with, you said those 3 styles or 3 beers you want to drink, how would you suggest building an itinerary in Sonoma County?
Well, so make sure you're doing it on one of the days that the shuttles are running.
Which is every Saturday through the end of February.
Yeah, and utilize that. The Smart Train really feels kind of like a game changer, right?
I just did it on Saturday. Yeah. I took the Smart Train up from San Rafael just to have a little journey of my own, see how it linked up with the shuttle, and it was great. So once you're at that shuttle, which starts from historic Railroad Square in Santa Rosa, it takes you around to 7 breweries, although you're not just limited to those 7 breweries.
Right. And so
it goes to Cuvée and Russian River.
Okay, so if you're at Cuvée, you can also go to Barley and Vine for a massive selection of draft beer. Like
one of the best draft beer lists in Sonoma County.
Incredibly well curated, and then he also buys all Sixtels. So even though he buys all Sixtels and there's a huge audience, he can serve quite a few beers per day. So even though it's a massive list, it doesn't get stale. Things turn over. You'll see a lot of really cool Sacramento breweries. Sacramento's a scene that's going absolutely crazy, winning tons of awards right now. So Jeff does a really good job of keeping those beers on, but it's all still, fresh beer. It's all still sold through really quickly, and it's a massive selection. Breaking my earlier rule, if you're there and you don't go to Tilted Shed's tasting room, which, is not a brewery, they are a cidery, which is technically a winery.
But it's nice to break it up.
Literally world class, taking advantage. That like, the questions earlier you were asking about agriculture are far more relevant to me for the wine world and the cider world. Tilted Shed has access to these grounds that have been apple orchards for a century plus, producing world-class fruit to make old world style cider. That seems like a very rich stop, and we haven't even left Windsor.
I know it sounds like you spent a whole day just in Windsor, but taking that shuttle, you have Cooperage, you have the Russian River downtown, you also have Hen House, of course, over on Bellevue Ave. And then coming up, but if you're coming up, say you're coming up from the North Bay and you want to make a pit stop for lunch and a pint in Petaluma, Rohnert Park, there's some great options there.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Lagunitas and Hen House are across the street from each other in Petaluma. There's an overwhelming list. And then, like you said, if you can take it down to San Rafael, you've got Pond Farm within walking distance of that smart stop. They make award-winning, world-class beer, have a very big SF Beer Week slate of events that you can check out. And then you're in downtown Santa Rosa, so you should probably eat at Soul Food. But you can also do that in Petaluma now, too.
Downtown San Rafael or downtown Santa
No,
Rosa?
yeah, San Rafael. My
Yeah.
bad. My bad. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
but Pond Farm has some good food. I went for the first time around Oktoberfest, and their food and beer together was really nice.
Yeah, they've really expanded that side of things. I'm embarrassingly have not spent as much time in that tasting room since they've expanded
Well, we'll have to
the
make a
food
point to
side.
meet up there
Let's
sometime.
do it. Let's do
So
it.
we've talked about Smart Train, the beer shuttle, FeBREWary. There's all these great ways to experience beer in Sonoma County as tourism. How do you see beer tourism evolving in Sonoma County and also the greater North Bay?
We have to do a way better job. Like we have to really do like, the work that you do, that Visit Santa Rosa does. I mean, I live in Oakland, right? So if I was pitching this, you can, the concentration of world-class breweries here is similar, but you can also go out to Alameda and look at this majestic view while drinking beer from world-class breweries. Well, so to answer your question specifically, Sonoma County, I think figuring out how to become a piece of this amazing Sonoma County trip, which for some might involve cannabis, for some might involve wine, for some they might be foodies. Single thread is in Sonoma County. Like, you could visit the number one restaurant in the country and the number one brewery in the country on the same trip.
And amplifying that is
Yeah,
important.
yeah, amplifying it and finding the way to make it compelling, right? Like, I don't know what's going to motivate somebody who lives in Denver or El Paso or wherever to make this, to decide this is the trip worth making, but I know it is. And saying that and highlighting why it can break down when somebody visits one of these extraordinary places and has a negative experience with a bartender, right? So like, you really have to see it all the way through to the customer's empty glass or the customer's cleared plate, or it breaks down. And so I don't mean to say that it is easy. We are getting back to doing the hard work of demonstrating why this stuff is important and why it's worth your time and your interest.
And I think with that, the consumer habits have changed since the pandemic and COVID, and people like to stay in their bubble. As you said, Alameda, Oakland, San Francisco, there are these packets and pockets and gluts of great breweries there. Why leave? If you have these things in your front door, why would you leave? But I think there's more to be said to getting people out and about to explore these different regions. And I know passports and maps and these things are all such a pain in a way, but if you can find the right way to do it and get buy-in from everybody, having some sort of North Bay regional beer map, there's the cheese trail.
Yeah.
Why is there no North Bay beer trail? I mean, the FeBREWary passport that Santa Rosa does is great.
It's funny to hear you say that because y'all do so much more than everybody else. But yeah, I think there's things like that. But it comes down to, you're asking a lot, right? You're asking tiny companies with overworked operators who have to make choices about what gets their attention and their time.
Right.
They don't have the resources to do it all. To see the value in collaboration with people who are nominally their competitors, right? I think I can make a very compelling case very quickly that they are not actually your competitor, that we still have so many more people to bring into the fold of drinking, real beer and drinking beer that's not treated like a commodity.
And it goes with that saying, rising tide lifts all ships. The stronger you are in this together, the better you can conceivably be.
I certainly think so, but an interdependence comes with that. How people regard my experience ends up being related to a bartender who doesn't know what they're talking about at a brewery I don't own. That's scary, Yeah. And so it really is like, we have to commit to a set of standards. We have to commit to just a lot of hard work. I wish I had a better answer that didn't involve outworking everybody else, but that's what works.
Absolutely. And a couple for you as we wrap up here, Sayre. I want to talk about the Guild a little bit, as you are the spearheading figure of the Guild, whether you wanted to be or not. No, I know you wanted to be, but what role does the Guild play in advocacy, sustainability, and long-term survival for the local breweries?
I mean, that's our entire mission. I think there's very simple, discrete things we can do where it's like, hey, this is happening near your brewery this night. Like our big festival, SF Beer Week Fest, is going to bring 1,200 beer drinkers to Salesforce Park. I've got 2 member breweries within very small walking distance and like 4 or 5 that would be very reasonable to visit afterwards. And so literally just reaching out to them, being like, hey, let's make sure we target so you get a chunk of this 1,200 in your tap room, right? And maybe that makes you an extra $1,000 this week. It really is that small. And how we do it on a day-to-day, obviously Beer Week is this big, loud thing we do that does drive a lot of traffic and has a proven history of success. But year-round, we operate an email newsletter called Brew Deck, which I encourage all your listeners to sign up for. That's a combination of our mission to make the beer consumer more savvy. So there's a lot of educational content because a more savvy beer drinker is more likely to patronize a small brewery. But then at the end, there's always event listings, mostly free events that you can do that weekend at our member breweries. So that's a good way for your listeners to stay up on stuff and for us to drive traffic into our brewery tasting rooms. The long-term survival piece is right now, because the economics are so upside down for large-scale wholesale, long-term survival, I wish I could worry about that. I'm worried about short-term survival. And that has to do with getting bodies into tasting rooms.
So that's just survival in general, is getting bodies into tasting rooms. And that's completely, I see it everywhere.
I do think there will be a market equilibrium at some point in the future where breweries can decide how much they want to dedicate their resources to going after draft wholesale, the grocery store, all these other channels. But right now, the economics of those things don't make sense for the vast majority of our membership. And so it's really about like either you do that, but you supplement that by what happens in your tasting room, or you just really focus almost entirely on what happens in your tasting room. Right. And so we're working on driving traffic into those tasting rooms.
And I'm here to help as much as I can, both on this podcast and in my own personal endeavors. So one more for you here, Sayre. When FeBREWary and SF Beer Week and the whole month ends, the crowds thin out, where do you like to grab a pint, and what do you choose, unless you're just collapsing on your couch and not looking at a beer for a couple weeks here?
Well, so the guild is treated as a brewery legally. So I can't say the name of a retailer. I have a great local here in my neighborhood in Oakland. It's walking distance. I think that's a quality of life thing that I hope everyone has, whether that local is a brewery or a tap room that keeps the lines clean, keeps the beer fresh, and sells through inventory quickly and trains their staff, all of those things. But if you have one of those, that's a precious thing. There didn't used to be those. I'm old enough to tell you, there did not used to be those. So support those places. So for me, I drink regular ass beer. Like the trend towards lagers and low ABV stuff is very much in line with where my tastes have gone. My local does have Lucre faucets, so I would roll up there. They often stock Reality Check, but that or a beer in a similar style poured from the Lucre. I also still moonlight at like a couple shifts a month at Humble Sea in Alameda, so I'm drinking a lot of Humble Sea Helles off the Lucres, beers like that. Large volume, might have two of them, under 5%, lots of flavor. That's where
that's what you want.
That's what I can kind of drink forever. Yeah.
I completely understand it. Well, Sayre, this has been a fantastic conversation with you. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you just want to add for our listeners before we sign off here?
So much. Definitely go to Visit Santa Rosa, check out the beer passport. That does run year round.
Yes.
FeBREWary is when it's launched. So jump on it. Make sure you're part of that. Make sure you're taking advantage of those shuttles. Why wouldn't you do that? sfbeerweek.org runs. So SF Beer Week this year runs from February 20th to March 1st. Events, our first about 110 event listings are up now. More are getting populated every day.
I was on the site last night. I was already checking my calendar and see what my liver could handle for that week. There was a lot of great stuff going on.
And the functionality of that site is you build your itinerary.
Right.
So you can flag a participant, which is essentially a brewery or a retail, a venue, and you can subscribe to all their events, or you can go event by event and flag them, and then the site will generate your itinerary. So
I've always appreciated how well built the SF Beer Week site is for like interactiveness. And so SF Beer Week, February 20th to March 1st. What else?
And sign up for the Brew Deck year round.
Sign up for the Brew Deck. It's a great read. I start my Tuesdays or Wednesdays reading that. And I know Sayre blasts it out there on a lot of community groups in the beer world. So keep your eyes out there. I will say to our listeners, get out there. We're halfway through February. Get out there. Support your local breweries. They do need it. They're great third spaces. Even if you're not drinking beer, they have plenty of other options, be it local food trucks, seltzers, non-alcoholic options. Go out there, show some love. And Sayre, I'll catch you soon.
All right. Thanks, Alan.
Take care. The interviews are done, which means I think it's time to crack one open. Interviews make me thirsty, and I want you thirsting for knowledge about some great beer, both local and not so local. Each week, I'll introduce you to a beer I find discussion-worthy and explain the nuances of what makes it fantastic in my eyes and why you should give it a try. And just to keep it on point, I'll even try to make sure the beer reflects the vibe or theme of the episode. Well, what could make me thirst for a beer more than a conversation all about our local beer scene and the celebration of FeBREWary? However, I'm going to feature something a little different this episode. Instead of truly exploring a beer in front of me, I'm going to talk about a beer that's about to be released, in the hopes of getting all you listeners out there to enjoy it, perhaps with your host. Part of SF Beer Week's magic is that each chapter of the Brewers Guild gets together and brews a collaboration beer. From the South Bay and Peninsula all the way up to Sonoma County, it really rings in the spirit of the beer industry. This year, there was a theme attached, with all 6 beers brewed being a variation of the beloved IPA to tell the story of the style throughout its history. Our North Bay chapter's collab beer was brewed together at Old Kaz in Rohnert Park. Involved were, of course, Old Kaz, Parliament Brewing, Hen House, Cuvée, and more. They got together and brewed a West Coast-style IPA called Bright Future, perhaps signaling what they hope are the theme of days ahead for the industry. West Coast IPAs are known for their clear and bright appearance, and this one promises to be no different. This is a more modern take on the style, with crisp notes, low bitterness, and loads of tropical aromas shining off of the first sips. Bright Future will be available at Old Kaz during SF Beer Week, which launches February 20th, along with a slew of events around the North Bay. You can also snag a ticket, though they're selling fast, for the SF Beer Week Kickoff Festival in San Francisco at Salesforce Park on the 20th, where you'll be able to sample all 6 IPAs brewed by the Guild chapters. Head to sfbeerweek.org or check your favorite local brewery social media for their calendar of Beer Week events upcoming. Thanks so much to my friend Sayre for appearing on our Suds Studded episode this week, and cheers from your host. This Must Be the Place is produced by our friends at Pod Locally, an audio platform helping local voices connect to their communities. Don't forget to like, subscribe, or comment on all your favorite podcast apps, and visit the show notes for more information, links, and resources. Look out for our next drop on Sunday. Until then, I'm your host, Alo Galinsky, saying have a great week.